Here in the city of the future, easily accessible streetcars pepper main thoroughfares while pedestrians safely walk across roads and tram lines, stopping to mingle as transit parts around them. Accidents are few and far between because the rare cars that do exist move at a much slower pace, yielding to bicycles, people, and street-level public transit. For car-centric countries like the United States, this seems like a pipe dream. Except 100 years ago, this kind of streetscape was commonplace, like here on the boulevards of San Francisco in 1906, where streetcars, pedestrians, bikers, carriages, and cars move through the streets at human speeds. We had a chance once. Transportation could have looked vastly different than it does today. But since 1906, moving from A to B has become increasingly individualized, accelerated, and sprawled. And with this transformation has come destruction, oppression, and death. We desperately need new visions of transportation, because across the world, calls for transit disruption, whether for ecological or social reasons, often unintentionally masquerade as reskins of our current broken transit system. Whether it be electric cars or light rail connecting suburbs to downtowns, these solutions can often cling to the racist and extractivist histories of transit design. So we need to radically transform the way we move. We need democratic plans and designs that prioritize people, communities, and the planet over products and goods. This is how and why we might just achieve that transit future. This video is sponsored by Ground News. Stick around to the end until to find out how you can get 30% off Ground News. In 1956, car-based transportation received its biggest windfall in the United States. Then President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act into law, a massively ambitious infrastructure package that literally paved the way for the interstate highway system that crisscrosses the US today. With the passage of that act, Eisenhower locked in the gas-powered automobile as the way to move throughout the country. And with his signature, he also locked in the continued racist destruction of black communities. Because across the US, roads were and still are weapons of dispossession and segregation. According to Professor Deborah Archer, for example, in St. Paul, Minnesota, the construction of Interstate 94 displaced 1/7 of the city's black residents. Meanwhile, the construction of Interstate 579 cut off the predominantly black neighborhood of Hill District in Pittsburgh from the downtown area and displaced thousands of its black residents. According to Archer, this caused the population to dwindle from approximately 54,000 in 1950 to approximately 9,500 in 2013. So across the US, the construction of the interstate highway system sliced up, dispossessed, and destroyed black communities, often in the service of rich white neighborhoods. When it comes to transportation, especially cars and roads, it's never just about getting from point A to point B. Roads, cars, trains, buses, planes all carry with them the baggage and biases of their planners, as well as economic and social forces. Indeed, under capitalism, transportation networks are much more about the production and distribution of commodities than they are about people. From cargo rail slowing down Amtrak passenger trains in the US to heavy trucking on interstate highways, transportation networks have been essential to the construction of capitalist imperialism. Fossil fuels and the vehicles they propel are the foundational gears by which capital in the imperial core is able to exploit the labor forces and extract the raw material wealth of the imperial periphery. Within the US, for example, Amazon can transport their goods at such low cost because of the extensive interstate highway system that the state maintains and subsidizes. And roads, ports, and rail networks have been used in the imperial periphery as a way to, as one paper notes, facilitate colonial administration and economic extraction from the 16th century onwards. As a result, transportation infrastructure can often be built initially with designs for bringing labor and materials and commodities to market, rather than connecting people to each other. Whether it was the British colonial infrastructure projects in India or China's Belt and Road Initiative in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, roads and transportation infrastructure are wielded as tools to ease the channels of colonial extraction, often of raw materials and labor from the imperial periphery to the core. And when transportation systems do focus on people, it's often about getting people to and from work. In the case of Chicago's train system, for example, All routes act as spokes radiating out from the central business district. If you want to go anywhere outside of Chicago's downtown area, it often involves multiple transfers or going one direction only to double back the way you came. This kind of radial design, present in both highway systems and mass public transit, have led to the stretching of urban space into vast suburbias, facilitating white flight and the bypassing of marginalized communities through overpasses and express lines. As Professor Stefan Kipfer bluntly puts it, the upward redistribution machine that is imperial capitalism has meant that elites and upper segments of the middle classes increasingly live in protected financial districts, gentrified central city areas, office parks, and gated communities. They are connected to each other by means of transportation that allow them to bypass the quote-unquote squalor of shanty towns or segregated districts, highway overpasses, regional commuter trains, and rapid intercity links. In the case of San Francisco Bay Area's rapid transit system, commonly known as BART, trains run nearly 3 miles without stopping in the San Antonio area of Oakland, which is only 10% white. While in the predominantly white areas of Walnut Creek and Pleasant Hill, BART stations are only 1 3/4 miles apart. As author and planner Christoph Spieler writes, BART was literally designed in the late 1960s to speed white suburban commuters past black inner-city residents. And with the sprawl, emphasis on white comfort, and rapid transit of goods comes immense environmental impact. According to the IPCC, transportation is responsible for 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, making it the 4th largest source of emissions worldwide. Of those emissions, road transportation is by far the biggest culprit, accounting for 69% of total global transportation emissions. And those emissions will only continue to grow in the coming years. As Carbon Brief summarizes, without mitigation actions, transport emissions could grow by 65% by 2050. In short, the way we organize transit is about much more than moving around. The roads we pave facilitate racist dispossession, capitalist accumulation, and ecological destruction. And as we look towards the looming future of climate crisis, it's tempting to ignore these issues for supposed quick fixes. Solutions like electric cars can seem like a panacea of eco-friendly transportation that doesn't have to involve the sure-to-be-difficult process of overhauling everything about our transportation systems. However, as we'll soon see, keeping cars on the road, whether electric or gas, can only offer us small change and false hope, and not real solutions. As the summer sun bakes the asphalt on the streets of Houston, thousands of cars barrel from the suburbs to downtown on Interstate 10. Most days, traffic in Houston looks like this. Here in Houston, roads and superhighways like the 26-lane Katy Freeway seem to coat every inch of the massive city. Streets crawl out in tendrils from the dense urban core that quickly sprawls into suburban single-family homes. Highway overpasses and interchanges crisscross through neighborhoods. Car crashes, injuries, and fatalities are a daily occurrence. And over it all lies a blanket of smog that swirls in a mixture of tailpipe emissions and pollution from nearby oil and gas refineries. These car-centric designs of Houston are the norm throughout the United States, a country where over a century of mythologizing and idealizing the benefits of the automobile has left us unable to see its drawbacks. But the United States is by no means alone. This car-centric model of wide streets and superhighways spans the globe. From Canada to Greece to Australia, cars and roads are consistently prioritized over public transit. So when Tesla, BYD, or the new electric Hummer offer themselves up as transportation disruptors that will save the world, we must stop to consider what that will mean. We have to seriously interrogate whether the electrified car is the best option considering the long history of dispossession and extraction of the automobile. We must ask questions like, is the electric car the most ecological transit solution? Does it repair the harm of our current transit systems? Will it prevent easily avoidable deaths and injury? And finally, who are these cars for? In terms of the environment, electric cars are certainly less impactful than gas-powered ones. There's no question about that. They not only have zero tailpipe emissions, but could also act as battery backups for the grid. But in the process, we'll be paving our way further down the path that the Federal Aid Highway Act put the US on in 1956. Electric cars just give a green facelift to transportation built on racist decision-making and capitalist profit-making. A future of electric cars means expanding the current destruction rot by roads that slice up communities of color in poor neighborhoods alongside forest and prairies. Roads now occupy over 20% of the Earth, not including Greenland and Antarctica. And replacing all gas-powered cars with electric ones merely shifts imperialist extraction from oil to precious metals like cobalt, as I explained in these videos, while also completely avoiding the staggering death toll of cars and trucks. Every year, traffic accidents kill or injure 1.35 million people. And in the US, road crashes are the leading cause of death for people aged 1 to 54. And yet we still continue to drive down the path of the car, claiming that electric automobiles are the linchpin of a beautiful and bright future. And finally, who are these cars for? The average price of an electric car in the United States is $53,000, a steep asking price even with a $7,500 federal tax subsidy. When we prioritize the car and not public transit, walkable cities, and bike infrastructure, these steep prices mean that those who can't afford an electric vehicle must either face massive commute times just to get food on the table, brave the dismally maintained or non-existent bike lanes, or go deep into debt to purchase and maintain their car. All of this is not to say there will never be cars in the future. Cars can be crucial in situations where homes are hard to get to or transit just isn't available yet. But it does mean dramatically fewer cars. Downscaling vehicle production so we don't have to mine gargantuan amounts of resources to fulfill a zero-carbon dream. Instead, we can pour our resources and time into transportation options built for moving people around safely, equitably, and in an ecological way. So, for the sake of the environment, for the sake of people, and for the sake of our communities, we must plan and build a better way to move. If the future of transportation is to be just, accessible to all, and in harmony with the natural world, it cannot look like this or this.
It is literally bulletproof to a 9mm handgun.
Instead, it must look like this or this. We already have glimpses into the future of sustainable, accessible, and human-centric transportation systems, like Curitiba's bus rapid transit system or Amsterdam's bike lane network, or even China's extensive high-speed rail infrastructure. But we must go further than just protected bike lanes or tramways on grass. As we've already learned, transportation, even public transit, is never only about getting from A to B. So designs for future transit must be anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-ableist, and ecologically sound. But what exactly does that look like on the ground? Ecologically speaking, we know that public transportation, walking, and biking are crucial parts of an environmentally sound transit system. According to a 2021 study, even in the car-centric US, public transportation saved 63 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in 2018, the equivalent of taking 16 coal power plants offline for a year. But that public transit system needs to avoid the pitfalls of designing for optimal labor flow and white comfort. So frequent electric trams and trains must create a dense web connecting city blocks, while electrified buses run quickly and frequently on streets where bike paths and walkways take up most of the space, looking very much like a modernized version of that 1906 San Francisco Boulevard. Regional metro stations must spring up everywhere that has been dispossessed by interstates and roads. Trains, trams, buses, and bikes must connect people to their communities and the world around them rather than just ferrying people from the home to work. Like in the case of the metro in Oslo, that brings people to the ski slopes for recreation and play. And regional, national, and international high-speed rail must complement these urban and rural transit network, crushing the distance between town and country through transportation. This would inevitably mean fewer roads, fewer highways, and could look similar to the low car use zones in places like the Netherlands. Crucially, these transit interventions can't just be for able-bodied passengers. We need to be placing disability justice planners in dialogue with transit engineers to foreground needs often overlooked in an ableist world. Because transportation is a human right. And in this future world, all of this transportation must be free. Snapping back to the present, there are already test cases of free public transit in cities across the world. In the Polish city of Bełchatów or Gałkaia in Brazil, you can walk onto any bus or train for absolutely no cost. But while these programs have led to increased ridership, many did little to reduce the flow of cars. Like in the case of the Estonian city of Tallinn, where a study found that pedestrians and bikers were the ones taking advantage of the free transit. not drivers. This is not to say that these programs don't work. It instead reveals that if one of our goals is to minimize and dismantle our car-centric world, zero-cost fares are not enough to do that. We must also embrace, as Stefan Kipfer writes, 2 additional steps: expanding transit capacities and actively restricting automobile transportation. In short, tackling roads and building up public transit will require both the carrot and the stick. We have to expand public transit while also limiting car use. This means measures like phasing out car-related subsidies, severely restricting parking, stopping greenfield road expansion, giving transit, cyclists, and pedestrians systematic priorities on existing roads, making planning approvals for all development contingent upon transit access, and levying employer taxes for transit use. All the while, making sure we're not creating regressive taxation or fueling gentrification. Budget-wise, we already spend trillions building, maintaining, and planning out roads, not to mention the individual costs of car maintenance, loans, and accidents. As Kipfer notes, from a macroeconomic and social efficiency point of view, public transportation is far less expensive than the existing privatized system. In this way, financing free and expanded transit represents a fiscal benefit rather than a cost. And if building out a massive public transit system seems like an impossible task, especially in a car-dominated country like the US, luckily we've already done something similar in 1956 with the Federal Aid Highway Act. Ultimately, this transition to an ecologically just transportation system might act as a linchpin to a broader ecological and anti-capitalist system. Calling into question the way we move ourselves and the things we need will inevitably make us consider what we do actually need, because transportation touches everything from where affordable housing should go to the last mile of delivery between warehouse and front door. As the former chief sustainability officer for IKEA, Pia Heidenmark-Cook, notes on the Outrage and Optimism podcast, if we get rid of roads,
we simply can't do business, because 18% of our business today is e-commerce. E-commerce is connected to home delivery, and if we can't drive into people's homes, we can't do our business.
So replacing roads with trams, parks, gardens, bike paths, and walkways jeopardizes the profits of delivery behemoths like IKEA and Amazon that rely heavily on vans and streets to speed packages to customers as fast as possible. Future transportation systems ask us to prioritize people rather than the extractivist gears of capitalist production, which means any environmentally ethical and socially just transit design needs economic and social systems outside the bounds of what capitalist market solutions can provide. We will not buy our way to a human and earth-oriented global transit system. The electrification of Amazon's delivery vehicles, for example, while shrinking their massive carbon emissions, still upholds our broken and dangerous transportation web. One that kills millions every year, facilitates imperial plunder, cuts us off from community, and in the process slices the natural world into fragmented ecosystems. So to truly revolutionize our transportation, we must embrace a deeply democratic economy that rationally plans for the well-being of all people and the planet. Despite immense hurdles, transportation wins are popping up across the world, even in the United States, like the recent flood of federal funds pushing for high-speed rail in California and Nevada. But high-speed rail in that region is not without its critics, which is why I've been using this video's sponsor, Ground News, to stay up to date with transportation issues like these to peer past the curtain of media bias. I've been using Ground News for a long time and really appreciate how clear and simple it makes current events. Ground News is a website and app that collects over 50,000 media sources into one place and lets you compare how headlines are being covered across the political spectrum. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. The layout of Ground News allows you to quickly compare headlines and articles to see what information is emphasized or left out. I especially love the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. Especially when it comes to news about climate change, I think it's really important to see what articles both sides of the political spectrum are missing, which is why I use Ground News literally every day. And right now you can go to ground.news/OCC to get 30% off their Vantage subscription, which includes a feature called My News Bias. It's basically a dashboard that visualizes how you read the news. It shows you your top news sources, whether you engage with different perspectives, what topics you're interested in, and a lot more. So go to ground.news/OCC or click the link in the description to support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. And if you already signed up for Ground News, consider supporting Our Changing Climate directly on Patreon or watching last month's video on farm workers. Otherwise, I will see you next month.